Welcome to the Union Church of Rio de Janeiro, UC University. My name is Sam Sawyer, and I would like to welcome you back to the Systematic Theology Core Seminar. In this session, we'll be looking at the Doctrine of Creation, the different views of creation. So let's start with the different views of creation. If you have not watched the previous session on the Doctrine of Creation, seven biblical truths about creation, I would suggest that you watch that session before continuing this one. We spent a good bit of time looking at these 7 statements because the Bible is not silent or confused when it comes to creation. But we often get frustrated because the Bible is not answering my specific question: what's the age of the earth? Imagine if the president were to announce a press briefing tomorrow to discuss the current state of the pandemic. He delivers it only to be met with a slew of skeptical and angry pieces in the papers the next day because he didn't address all their questions about financial reform. Any rational person would say, hey, he did say the briefing was about the pandemic, guys. My point is this: sometimes we need to stop and ask ourselves, is the problem with the Bible or with my question? For the creation account is far more concerned with the who and why of creation than exactly how and when. It's not that God doesn't possess such knowledge, but it's also not that knowledge that God in His wisdom believes we must have in order to rightly know Him and to trust Him. It was Galileo who once famously said, "The Bible shows the way to heaven, not the way the heavens go." Now you can push that too far to suggest the Bible has nothing to say about creation, but his point is well taken. The Bible as a whole deals with the most pressing human questions of suffering, sin, and salvation, not carbon-14 dating. That being said, there are a number of different ways Christians have understood the account of creation in Genesis 1 and 2. So the first we see is Theistic Evolution. This view seeks to marry naturalistic evolution with the biblical God. God created first matter and set in place the natural laws of the universe, and then evolution was the means by which He brought creation into existence. But this view faces a number of challenges. First, it has to say something that the Bible posits as an evil result of the fall, namely death and suffering, was not only present before the fall, but was the very mechanism God used to bring about all that is good, namely life. Second, it has to affirm that species evolve from one into another, whereas the Bible says God made each according to its kind. Third, the Bible portrays God as actively and sovereignly involved in each step of creation and preparation of the land for His people, which evolution denies outright. The next theory is the gap theory. This view holds to a gap of billions of years between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. There was a first creation in Genesis 1:1 of the heavens and the earth, but somewhere along the way there was some cosmic rebellion, Satan and the angels, and some cataclysmic event that left the earth largely destroyed, formless and void. So in Genesis 1:3, you don't have the first creation, but a second creation of 6 literal days. You may like this view if you hold to an old earth, but you would want to take day and evening and morning to be what they normally mean, literal 24-hour solar days. The great challenge to this view that the Bible never speaks of 2 creations. There's not a single verse that one can marshal for support. It must be read into the text, not read out of the text. And it would be hard to understand how God can make the universe and prepare the land for His people and say that it was very good, when in fact it had been made very bad and nearly obliterated. The next view is the day-age view. In this view, God created the universe, including Adam and Eve, in 6 sequential periods of time. But those periods were not 24 days, but ages that spanned perhaps millions of years. If you're convinced that the earth is 4.5 billion years old, this view accords with that prior commitment. But there are a few challenges, namely the sequence of events in Genesis 1 doesn't square up with the scientific understandings of life as we know it. So, sea creatures on day 5 come before vegetation on day 3. More to the point, the sun, moon, and stars come millions of years after plants and trees. The next view is called the literary framework view. In this view, Genesis 1 is not intended to be a chronological sequence of events, but is a literary framework, a topical ordering of the events. The point is not exactly when and in what order, but merely what. They notice helpfully, I think, that days 1 and 3 are days of forming light, sky, water, land, and days 4 through 6 are filling days, stars, birds, fish, animals, man. So Day 1, light and darkness are formed, and then in day 4, they are filled with the stars. Day 2, sky and waters are formed, and day 5, they are filled with birds, fish, and other things. The point is not exactly when and in what order, but merely what. They noticed helpfully, I think, that days 1 through 3 are days of forming, light, sky, water, land, and days 4 through 6 are days of filling, stars, birds, fish, animals, man. So day 1, light and darkness are formed, and then in day 4, they are filled with the stars. Day 2, sky and waters are formed. Day 5, they are filled with birds and fish. The view has good insights into the text, and it does sidestep the whole age of the earth question, but it does so largely by reading the text through the lens of poetry. And though Genesis 1 has poetic elements, it's not really a poetic genre. So it's tough to know what's merely figurative and what's literal. And though there is this element of forming and filling, there does seem to be something of sequence in the 6 days that culminates in the day 7. The next view is called the young earth creationism. God made the world and Adam and Eve in 6 literal 24-hour days. At face value, this is the natural reading of our English translations. If science says the earth is old, it's either because God made the earth mature like he did Adam and Eve, or because science is mistaken. Perhaps the flood and other cataclysmic events affected our dating methodologies. They rightly recognize that science as a discipline is predicated upon challenging an established hypothesis based on ever-changing data. So if I had to choose, I'll go with a divine revelation over human reason. The next view is called historic creationism. This view says that Genesis 1:1, instead of being a title for what's to come, actually records the creation of everything. Heaven and earth acts as a merism, that is a combination of 2 contrasting words to refer to an entirety. And so the phrase "in the beginning" is not punctiliar, but a duration of an indeterminate amount of time. With the universe already created in Genesis 1:1, the 6 creative days refer not to the establishment of the universe, but rather God's preparation of Eden for his people. Genesis 1:2 then describes the state of the world before God prepared a land for his people. Hence, from Genesis 1:2 to the end of Revelation, the Bible speaks of the people of God in relationship to the Garden of Eden. It is a journey from the original Eden to the new Eden, so to speak, as we see the narrative of human history played out from its beginning to its end. There are several advantages to this view. First, both believers in a young earth and believers in an old earth creationist could both hold to this view, since there are not a definite time given between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. Genesis 1:1 simply doesn't specify a time. Second, this view reads biblical terms as they're read later in the scriptures, such as the Hebrew words for time, land, and waters. Third, this view makes sense of the Bible's huge concern for God's people to live in his blessed land from Eden to the new Eden, the new creation. The disadvantage to this view is that it is merely one way to approach and read the Hebrew text. It reads biblical terms in a particular way that is helpful, but may not be the only way to read the text. Thus, the view itself is written off by some who read the Hebrew language differently. In conclusion, all in all, we must understand that the Bible doesn't give us all the details necessary to understand exactly the age of the earth. What is important to God is that we understand who created the earth and why he created it, for his glory, ultimately shown through the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is my hope that in today's session, we were able to glean more of what God has to say to us in his word, why he created the world, and the way in which he made it. In the next class, we will cover 2 more truths that the Bible has for us about the matter of creation, including what is perhaps the most important for us, the relationship of man to God's creation. Well, that's all for this session. In our next session, we'll be looking at the Doctrine of Creation, 4 non-Christian views of God and creation. Thanks for joining us for UC University Systematic Theology. Don't forget you can watch all of our content on our YouTube page at Union Church Rio. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and to share with your friends and family. Stay safe. See you later. See you soon.